I've spent the last decade, over a decade, on this yogic path, and I've spent the last 6 or 7 years coaching students that come to me with issues after they've had an awakening experience, or people that have just called more deeply to this spiritual path. And through learning and understanding through my own journey and also interfacing with students over a long period of time, I've begun to notice that there are really 3 reasons why people may be feeling miserable on their spiritual path. Now, I've done all 3, so it may not be the best idea to take spiritual advice from a self-proclaimed spiritual failure. However, there are 3 core dynamics that are at play when the spiritual journey becomes a misery for us. And I just want to open them up in this video, just so that you can self-reference within yourself and see, is it possible that I'm doing this? And I've left the most exciting one for last, because you know what YouTube's like, got to keep you watching. So I'm not only going to explain the issue, I'm going to explain what it actually means for you. And then I'm going to highlight the emotional cost that you'll be going through because of this thing that you're doing. And that's going to make it super clear for you that 1, this is costing you a lot. And 2, you don't really need to do this thing because it's probably coming from some form of an identity. It isn't based in reality or truth. It's based in the avoidance of truth and in separation. So let's do it. The first dynamic that I see on this spiritual path where people are beginning to feel miserable is this: the spiritual perfectionist. Now, on this path, there's no doubt that you need to do your sadhana. Sadhana is just your daily practice that brings aliveness into your system so that you can gain awareness and see deeper things inside of yourself so that you can grow, transform, change, make yourself into the highest vessel for life that you can so that you can serve it in the best way that's most appropriate for you and your soul's evolution and your soul's journey. And if you don't have any sadhana, you need it for this path. And I didn't want there to be any barriers to entry. So if you want to access some of the foundational sadhana that I used at the beginning of my path, it's over on my channel. It's absolutely free. Let me know how that goes. So let's have a look at what's happening in this perfectionist dynamic, especially around the sadhana. It's there to dissolve the separate sense of self. But the spiritual perfectionist believes that they are not good enough. Now, it's just an identity. It's not inherently true, because worth, true worth, is actually our natural state of being. Self-worth is not something generated in the mind. I mean, if it is generated in the mind, typically what we would call that is arrogance. No, self-worth is something deeper, and it actually requires no self. So it's kind of like a no self-worth on some level. But the spiritual perfectionist still has this separate sense of self that's trying to prove its worth through the practices. So the practices actually become a vehicle through which we're trying to generate and prove self-worth. I'll be good enough for this path and for God when I've done enough purification and I've done enough of my practices and I feel good enough, etc., etc. You probably potentially know an aspect of that in yourself. So our consistency on the mat comes and is driven by perfection. I need to get the poses correct. I need to have everything perfect. And really underneath all of this is a fear of maybe falling behind. So the practice isn't coming from that integral place. It's coming from a place of separation and not enough and lack. So basically, our nervous system begins to learn that resting, the messiness of life, is all some form of spiritual inadequacy on some level. And so the whole path just becomes about trying to be perfect so that we don't mess up. But that just creates even more of a tight bind, doesn't it? We're putting ourselves then in a spiritual straitjacket because you can't be perfect. You're human. And any spiritual path that doesn't allow humanness isn't a spiritual path at all. It's self-rejection. And we'll get onto that because there are deeper aspects of that, which we'll mention later on in the video, of something we might be doing that's making this path an absolute misery for us. But let's look at the emotional cost of where the misery is actually coming from this spiritual perfectionist. We can feel guilty when we aren't perfect in our life, because we take some of the teachings that are advanced teachings for us and we judge ourselves against them whilst we're a beginner or a novice or an apprentice. And we're like, oh God, I'm not good enough because I haven't hit this target or whatever it is inside of ourselves. So because of this obsession about getting things right, there is no joy. And if anything, this path should bring us that peace, that ease, that natural joy of creation. So if you're feeling miserable on the spiritual path, just check. Am I trying to be perfect? Am I trying to do it perfectly? Am I trying to rush this process along so that I get to somewhere where I'm not so stressed out? Because then finally, maybe I'll be perfect, even though when I'm there and perfect, the bar that I've set for myself for perfection will inevitably move, and then I'll not be perfect again. So I'll never, ever get anywhere near where I'm ever trying to go, and I'll never be satisfied. And that's a part of the path that we really have to let die inside of us, isn't it? The way that we're relating to the path. Because this path is about freedom and ultimately the liberation of your soul. And we cannot be liberated if we're bound by such tight constrictions inside. We'll never get to rest. So the next thing I want to bring up that may be creating misery in your path, especially when we're engaging in teachings, some sort of format or structure to our path, then we can make the teachings, the spiritual teachings, an ideology. And so what that really means is our identity takes on the dogma of the teaching and we'll whip ourselves using the teachings as a beating stick, again, when we're not living in accordance with those teachings to absolute perfection. What's actually happening is we're constantly analyzing, and I'm not making this wrong because it's part of the path, I suppose, on some level, it's a rite of passage. We're constantly monitoring hyper-vigilantly, like, am I doing this right? Did I get this correct? And then we're creating literal ideologies out of the teachings that really don't end up serving us. The best thing my teacher said to me is take what works and leave what doesn't. Use the structure, use the technologies, use the framework of the path to begin to understand the map, but then don't beat yourself with the map. It's just a map, and you are where you are. Just do the best that you can. Right effort, right action, consistently moving forward. Because otherwise, part of the pressure that builds with this type of thing, where the teachings become an ideology or our identity gets trapped around dogma, is the teachings begin to solidify into a spiritual persona. So even if somebody misunderstands us spiritually or tells us that we're not spiritual, that's going to create a whole mess inside because it doesn't correlate with the ideology that we have created inside of our mind. Now, this is coming from insecurity, because we don't feel good enough inside. So we set our image and we place it in front of everybody else and we say, I'm now super spiritual. Nothing can touch me. But we're hiding behind a mask because really, if we look at our lives, we're not really living super in alignment with the teachings. We're just doing our best, isn't it? At our current level of consciousness, at our current level of understanding. But when we're in this dogma identity or this spiritual identity, spiritual ego, this can last for a very long time because it's very quiet and it almost has the authority of God behind it, doesn't it? But when really it's just the ego. But because it's got spiritual teachings behind it, we see that as truth. But it isn't truth. It's an image that we're projecting so that everybody else sees us as spiritual, which isn't spirituality at all. When you're really spiritual, you won't know what's what at all. You definitely won't be identifying with the spiritual ego. You'll just be yourself. No need to identify, no need to prove, because all of that stuff has dried up in you. So this can create a certain amount of pressure inside because it makes the path, again, void of any joy. Because you just can't be yourself. You have to reject all of the aspects of yourself that you see as not spiritual because they don't fit into this ideological identity that we've made out of these teachings. And then when we don't live perfectly in accordance with these teachings, we whack ourselves with the spiritual book that we've been reading metaphorically. And here's the emotional cost, is it creates a deep amount of shame. So instead of self-inquiry, we just have shame-bound responses and a lot of self-repression and self-rejection, which we're going to move on to in a moment because this one is the most important one. Because when dogma or a dogmatic approach becomes the way that we're approaching this spiritual path, instead of being curious, we're just constantly self-correcting ourselves, even if our motives are fine or the action is fine and correct. But because we've been told we must live a certain way because we've taken the spiritual teachings as fact and as a dogma, this creates a very, very toxic internal reality, doesn't it? Because our lives aren't designed to be lived in a book. They're designed to be lived in the world where nothing is perfect. So if you're finding that your human emotions and the way that you feel are making you feel like you're regressing on the path, well, you might fit in this category. But now the most important one, and this is the final one I'll bring up for you today. Your spiritual path will become an absolute misery for you if we are the unintegrated one. So let's have a look at what's actually happening inside this one. This one is the ultimate bypasser. This is the one where our real world needs, like finances, like relationship, etc., are bypassed in pursuits of spirituality. We allow our avoidance to become the biggest thing, and we think our avoidance is spirituality. We're rejecting our needs for connection, for deep love, and becoming this avoidant, unattached, distant one. This is unintegrated, you see, and this will be creating absolute hell on earth for you on the path. And you might justify it thinking, oh, yes, I'm meant to feel empty. And it's like, no, you're not. This path will lead you to more fullness and more wholeness. Now, there are aspects of you, for sure, that we have to integrate. And some of the teachings can say, oh, you have to transcend your preferences. And the immature spiritual ego, who hasn't quite integrated some of their preferences yet, will use this as an excuse or an attempt to avoid the parts of themselves that they're really scared to look at, like some of these sexual quirks and kinks, or all of these easily rejectable aspects of ourself. But this is where the path becomes miserable for us, because we're trying to transcend the aspects of ourself that we haven't yet had an ability on the human level to integrate yet. And so what that turns into is suppression and repression of these desires and these needs. Whatever you resist will persist. And so to really set yourself free, yes, in the long term, you do have to transcend your preferences. That doesn't mean you'll never have any of the things that you once enjoyed in your life. You will. They will just be seen from a different standpoint. And they will be able to be used in your life and enjoyed in your life from a deeper space, because ultimately you've accepted who you are. But you're also flexible enough inside to still continue moving and showing up in the correct ways when life isn't meeting your preferences. And because it won't all of the time, why should it? So these parts of ourselves that are left unintegrated, the spiritual ego wants to transcend them too early. And this is what we mean by the unintegrated one. And this one will cause absolute misery and energy drain on your path. I guarantee that. So if you're noticing any of these three inside of you, don't worry, you haven't done anything wrong. It seems to be that this is just part of the path that tricks a lot of us up, myself included, and sometimes can take a long time to mature and grow through some of these things, because we want to reject the human, isn't it? In order so that we may be spiritual and transcend to higher dimensions and realms. But it really doesn't work like that. The spiritual growth journey is done on the human plane. And to access deeper states of awareness, deeper states of consciousness, you have to, what's the saying? Know thyself. And that means know thyself on all dimensions without rejecting any of them. So that's all I've got time for. I hope that helps you. Lots of love. Bye-bye.